Wrong in the head? In a new factory outside town, the people in the office didn't like Mr. Taylor, their boss. One day at lunchtime, Mr. Taylor walked through a market near his office. He saw some hats and thought, "I like those brown and black hats. Very nice." He thought about the hats for 2 or 3 minutes. "Perhaps I'll buy a brown hat tomorrow. I can wear it to work." The next day, he went back to the market and bought a brown hat. He wore it to work every day after that. But Mr. Taylor's brown hat was more for the garden than for the office. So everybody in the office laughed at him about it behind his back. 2 weeks later, 2 of the men from the office were in the market and they saw some hats. "Look at those hats. They're the same as the boss's new hat," one man said. "That's right. He's got a brown one," the other man answered. "Let's buy the same hat. No, 2 hats. I've got a plan. Listen." The men bought 2 more hats, the same colour as Mr. Taylor's hat. But one hat was much bigger, and the other was much smaller. The next day, when Mr. Taylor was out for his lunch, the 2 men took his hat and left the bigger hat in the same place. At the end of the day, he took his hat and put it on. "This hat's too big," he thought. "Why? I don't understand." The next day, when Mr. Taylor was in the factory, the 2 men took the bigger hat and left the smaller hat in its place. When he was ready to go home, Mr. Taylor put on this hat, but it was very difficult. "Something's wrong here," he thought. "This hat's too small, but I think it's my hat." On some days, Mr. Taylor's hat was too big. On other days, it was too small. And on some days, it was right. After 2 weeks of these problems with his hat, Mr. Taylor began to think that something was wrong with his head, so he went to a doctor. "I've got a very unusual problem, doctor," he said. "My head is bigger one day and smaller the next, and sometimes it's okay. What do you think is wrong with me?"